So we turn now to discussing briefly about the goals of social security policies. So in the previous module, we considered that social policy aims to address and manage social risks. That's why I really wanted you to consider the word risk and keep it in mind. So social security policy also aims to secure human dignity and to alleviate poverty by ensuring access to adequate benefits and social protection against these risks. We also considered that social security is recognized as a human right, and we've been able to even consider a quote from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which stated that everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for health and well-being, as well as a security in circumstances such as unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age, and other situations beyond individual controls. So in a sense, this quote from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which we considered in the previous recording, aligns closely with the rationale behind Australia's social security system. For example, in Australia, the disability support pension and the age pension directly correspond to the needs outlined in this, code, which we considered in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And in a sense, social security is fundamental to debate about redistribution and even the debate about the role of the government and even human rights broadly. So in a sense, again, social security is one of these key contested areas of social policy, reflecting differing political values and reflecting, how people's experiences continues to really raise questions about fairness, entitlement, and the role of the state in supporting citizens. So the other roles of and other goals of social security are things like prevention of poverty, and that's so true if we want to consider poverty as a risk, but also other risks such as income replacement and life cycle redistribution, and even promoting reentry into employment among people who are affected by conditions that might lead to unemployment. All these are core goals of social security. So the emphasis here is really being placed on the fact that each goal varies according to the values and beliefs of those making the policies. So, in a sense, if we have a labor's government, we might see that they prioritize some of these goals and maybe not so much the others. But if we end up having the Australian Democrats, which is the other the other party you are considering for your second assessment, that might suggest different emphasis on particular goals of social security policy in Australia. So this, in a sense, problematizes the way we speak about poverty and raises important questions such as what is even poverty and how do we measure it? What rate of payment is needed to prevent poverty? So when speaking about poverty, there are many different ways of defining it. um, you know, there is this quote from, Laura Simpson Reeves that poverty, how poverty is defined and operationalized is critical to policy and academic debates, as this is intertwined with explanations, causes, and possible solutions. Definitions of poverty are again value laden. So typically viewed through an economic lens, poverty can be categorized into major forms. Those are the absolute poverty, which is all about the minimum, not meeting the minimum required for basic consumption and relative poverty compared to other people in the same society at the same point in time. So in terms of how we measure poverty in the Australian context, at least there are several measurements, which are in place and which people use depending on, what they really want to have as understanding of poverty. So some of these fundamental concepts might be very useful when measuring poverty, and some of these are even established models of measuring poverty. One of them is the Hudson's poverty lines model, which was developed in 1973 by Professor Ronald Hardison following a government inquiry. And this really, is such a way of defining poverty by setting a benchmark disposable income considered necessary to support the basic needs of a typical family. So this usually considers, again, family as being composed of at least two adult people and two children, or more or less. But the idea is just really to measure or provide figures that helps us understand to what extent people are being affected by poverty as a family, but not as just one individual. So again, this keeps on being updated, and every year Melbourne Uni has a, Melbourne Uni often, produces quarterly updates about this specific trend and giving us insights into what poverty looks like in Australia. So the other one is the median income, which is all about reflecting the midpoint of income distribution in society. So unlike the mean or the average poverty or the Hardison's poverty line, which can be skewed by extremely high income, median income offers a more realistic representation of income support and is often used to identify those falling below these income lines. And then we also have the concept of deprivation approach, which just really looks at poverty by assessing what goods and services are essential and estimates the income required to access them, again, considering place and time specifically among people. So in a sense, many different measures of poverty are often used in Australia, but if you go in other countries, you'll find similar kind of metrics and measurements being used. And the idea is just to provide insights into what poverty looks like nationally or even at state level. Really hope that's very clear. So, an important element is also a consideration of the means of poverty alleviations, which are being used in Australia. And mainly, maybe I don't want here to give you, just a detailed overview of all of these means, but just briefly stating that many of these means of poverty alleviation get to emphasize, to put an emphasis on payments going to those without other means of support. And it is, again, very much targeted kind of payment with strict eligibility requirements. And again, horizontal equity versus vertical equity considerations are kind of interacting in the way we tend to alleviate poverty in Australia. So the goal is, of course, mostly around income replacement in the Australian context. And this might involve things like compensating people for risks from reduced income for a limited period of time, maybe because of an illness or anything like that. And also at times it is related to life cycle redistribution, which just looks at things like, payroll related superannuation and things like that. So in a sense, the goal of, you know, social security in Australia is also around a re-entry to employment. And again, here the idea is just to help people, entering employment, because there is this understanding that we really don't want people to keep relying on, income support. We rather want people to be working because there is this understanding that people who just rely on income support all over their life, that tends to drag them into intergenerational poverty. And there had been, evidence that people in those conditions tend also to train their children into similar situations. So the belief is therefore that employment is the best route of poverty reduction and poverty alleviation, because the idea is also that systems have to encourage people to make more effort to get into work, and rather than just relying on unemployment benefit and similar kinds of arrangement. So in a sense, the idea is that the best route to poverty alleviation is all about employment rather than just people relying often on social assistance. So in the next recording, we shall be listening to institutional arrangement of social security policy in Australia.